Welcome to Paranormal, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them. Story 1, The parade that never reached the church. New York. Every December, New York celebrates Christmas loudly. Lights everywhere, choirs on street corners, nativity scenes squeezed between coffee shops and subway entrances. But in the borough of Queens, there was one tradition that never made the news, never appeared on official calendars, and never allowed cameras. They called it the Jesus Parade. It wasn't the flashy kind with floats and sponsors. No marching bands, no police barricades, just people, hundreds of them, walking silently through the streets on Christmas Eve night, carrying wooden crosses, candles, and handwritten prayers. No music, no chanting, only footsteps. I learned about it because I lived on 147th Street, right where the parade passed every year. And because the year I saw it properly, someone didn't come back. The parade always began at 11:47 p.m., precise to the minute. People said the time symbolized the final moments before Christ's birth. Others said it marked something older, something the city had built over and forgotten. At first I thought it was a church thing, maybe some old Catholic community, immigrants holding on to tradition. But there was something wrong with it from the start. No one ever invited anyone. People just joined. The first year I noticed it, I was coming home from a late shift at the hospital. Snow dusted the sidewalks, thin and clean. I turned the corner and froze. The street was full. People lined up in two neat columns, stretching farther than I could see. They wore winter coats, scarves, hats. New Yorkers, but every single one of them had a wooden cross strapped to their back with twine. Not symbolic crosses, heavy ones, the kind that left splinters in their coats. They walked with their heads bowed, candles cupped in gloved hands. The flames didn't flicker, even when the wind kicked up between buildings. I stood there, unsure what to do. No one acknowledged me, not a glance, not a blink. I waited for someone to speak, to explain, to ask me to move. Instead, the line flowed around me like water around a rock. And then I saw the faces there. Eyes were open, but unfocused, like they were watching something. Just ahead of the street, something I couldn't see. I asked a woman near the back what this was. She didn't stop walking. She didn't look at me. She whispered, without moving her lips, "Don't fall behind." That was the first time I felt it, that pressure behind the eyes, that pull in the chest, like the night itself wanted me to step into line. I didn't. I went home, locked my door, and watched from my window. The parade passed for nearly 20 minutes, and then the street was empty. No sound, no wax, DRIPPINGS. No footprints in the snow. The next morning, the snow was untouched, like no one had walked there at all. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Calderon, about it. She'd lived on the block since the 1980s. Her hands shook when I mentioned the parade. "You saw it?" she asked. "Yes." She crossed herself. "They say it walks to the old church," she said. "The one that isn't there anymore." I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "There used to be a chapel near the river, before the expressway. They tore it down after an incident." "What incident?" She shook her head. "Every year," she said, "the parade walks the same route, same streets, same time. And every year, fewer people come back to their apartments afterward that night." I couldn't sleep. at 11:30 p.m. I heard the first sound, not bells, footsteps, hundreds of them, in perfect rhythm. I told myself I would only watch again, just observe. No interaction. But when the parade reached my building, something changed. Someone stepped out of line. A man about my age, late 20s, wearing a puffer jacket and sneakers. His cross looked newer than the others. The wood pale and clean. Our eyes met. For the first time, someone in the parade looked fully awake. He opened his mouth. "Please," he said. "I can't feel my hands." The people around him stopped, all at once. Every candle turned toward him, not the people, the candles. The flames leaned in his direction. The man tried to step back. The cross on his shoulders twisted, digging into his neck. He cried out, dropping to his knees. That's when the singing started. Not Christmas hymns, not words, a low, layered sound, like hundreds of voices breathing the same note. The man screamed. The sound cut off. The parade resumed, and the space where he'd fallen was empty. No blood, no cross, no footprints. I vomited in my sink and didn't stop shaking until morning the next day. Missing person posters appeared on light poles. The man's face stared back at me from every corner of the neighborhood. Daniel Ortiz, 29. Last seen Christmas Eve. I went to the police. They told me Daniel had been reported missing every year since 1996. Always on Christmas Eve. Always from Queens. Different Daniels. Same age. Same description. Same time. The officer lowered his voice. Unofficially, he said, "We tell people to stay indoors at midnight. Some things in this city move whether we acknowledge them or not." That night, someone knocked on my door, softly, 3 times. I looked. Through the peephole, a woman stood there holding a candle that her cross scraped the hallway floor. Her eyes met mine. She smiled. "You saw us," she said gently. "That means you were chosen." I backed away. "I didn't join," I said. "I'm not religious." She tilted her head. "Neither were most of us," she replied. "But he doesn't need belief, only witnesses." Behind her, the hallway filled with people, all carrying crosses, all smiling, all waiting, and somewhere, far down the street, church bells rang, but no church stood there anymore. The parade had come early, and this time, it had stopped for me. I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt, my hands slipping with sweat. The hallway outside went quiet, not empty, just quiet in the way a held breath is quiet. I stepped back slowly, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away. Then came the scratching, not fists, not nails, wood. The sound of crosses dragging lightly across my door. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard them shifting, adjusting their weights as if getting comfortable. Someone hummed low and steady, the same note I'd heard the night Daniel disappeared. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You can still walk with us." I turned off the lights and crouched behind my couch, trying to disappear inside my own apartment. Outside, the humming grew louder. Candles hissed softly, like breath passing through teeth. Then the woman spoke again, her voice right outside the door. "You don't have to carry a cross tonight," she said kindly. "You'll earn one later." Something heavy leaned against the door, not forcing, testing. I remembered what Mrs. Calderon had said fewer people come back to their apartments. Afterward, not none, fewer, which meant escape was possible. I opened my fire, escape window, and climbed out into the freezing night. The metal ladder shook under my weight, screeching loud enough to make my stomach drop. The humming stopped. Every head in the hallway turned toward the sound. I didn't look back. I climbed down, jumped the last few feet, and ran. Behind me, the building doors burst open, not slammed, but opened politely. Like the parade had all the time in the world. Footsteps followed. Perfect rhythm. I ran toward the main avenue, lungs burning. The city around me felt wrong, too quiet, too still. No cars, no sirens. Even the traffic lights hung frozen on red. Ahead, the parade flowed into the street, merging from side roads, alleys, subway entrances that hadn't been there before. Hundreds became thousands. They weren't just from my neighborhood. They were from everywhere. Men in business coats, women in hospital scrubs, teenagers in hoodies, elderly couples holding hands, all carrying crosses now, all walking toward the river, toward where the old chapel used to stand. I ducked into a bodega, but the door opened into a narrow stone hallway instead of shelves. Candles lined the walls. The smell of incense and river water filled my nose. I stumbled back out, screaming. The city itself was rearranging. Streets bent inward. Buildings leaned closer. Storefronts faded into brick and stained glass. New York was peeling away, revealing something older beneath it. I realized the truth. Too late. The parade wasn't moving through the city. The city was moving into the parade at the riverfront. The crowd stopped where the chapel once stood. Something waited, not ruins. A structure of wood and stone and bone, assembled from crosses stacked and fused together, forming a doorway tall enough to swallow a building. Candles burned in every crack. Carvings of faces covered the surface, screaming, praying, smiling. The woman from my hallway stood beside me. "You see it now," she said. The church was never destroyed. It was fed. The doorway opened. Inside wasn't darkness. It was crowded. People stood packed together, upright eyes open, mouths whispering hymns that never ended. Their bodies were still alive, but time slid off them like water. Daniel was there. He saw me, his lips moved. "Run," the singing rose. The crowd surged forward. Hands grabbed me, hundreds pressing across into my arms. The wood was warm, familiar, like it had been waiting for me. "No," I screamed. "I didn't agree to this." The woman's smile faded, just a little. "Everyone does," she said. Eventually, the doorway pulsed. The river behind us stopped flowing. I did the only thing I could think of. I dropped the cross into the water. The moment it touched the river, the candles flickered. The singing fractured. The structure groaned. Water surged forward like it had been released from a dam, slamming into the doorway. Faces on the walls twisted, mouths opening in silent terror. The woman screamed not in anger, but fear. "They need the crosses," she shouted. "They need the weight." The river swallowed the base of the structure. The doorway collapsed inward. People screamed as the ground gave way beneath them. Some vanished instantly, pulled inside. Others fell, their crosses ripping free and dragging them down. I ran behind me. The parade broke apart, not marching now, but panicking, stumbling, finally waking up by morning. The river had flooded part of the waterfront. Authorities blamed erosion. They always do. Hundreds were reported missing that Christmas. The story lasted one news cycle, then it vanished. So did the parade. Years have passed. I moved cities, changed jobs, avoided Christmas Eve like a curse, but every December, just before midnight, my phone vibrates with a single message from an unknown number. The church is rebuilding, and sometimes late at night I swear I hear footsteps outside my door. Perfect rhythm, waiting for me to walk again, because the Jesus parade never ends. It only waits for witnesses to become believers. Story 2. Asterisk. The bells that rang after midnight New York never truly sleeps, even on Christmas Eve. But there are moments, thin, fragile moments, when the city seems to hold its breath. That year, the night before Christmas, felt like one of those moments. I was working late as a freelance videographer, hired by a small independent religious group to document what they called a midnight Jesus parade. It wasn't official, not sponsored by any church I recognized, but they paid in cash and didn't ask many questions. In New York, that alone wasn't unusual. They told me to meet them near an old neighborhood in Lower Manhattan, close to a stretch of streets most people avoided at night. The buildings there were older, narrower, their brick facades blackened by decades of pollution. Some of them were abandoned, their windows boarded up or shattered. I remember checking my phone GPS twice, thinking I'd taken a wrong turn. The address led me to a small, forgotten church squeezed between two condemned buildings. No sign, no lights inside. Just a stone cross above the door. So weather-worn it looked like it might crumble if touched at exactly 11:30 p.m. The bells rang. They didn't sound electronic. They weren't amplified. They were deep, heavy, ancient, like something pulled from another century. The sound echoed down the empty streets, vibrating in my chest more than my ears. That's when the people began to arrive. They came quietly, one by one at first, then in small groups. Men, women, children, all dressed in dark winter coats, scarves pulled high, gloves covering their hands. Some carried candles wrapped in paper cups. Others carried wooden crosses, all the same size, all unpainted. Raw wood still splintered at the edges. No one spoke. I raised my camera, instinctively filming, though a part of me already wanted to leave. The viewfinder caught details my eyes hadn't noticed, faces too pale, eyes reflecting candlelight in a way that didn't look natural, mouths moving slightly as if whispering something I couldn't hear. A man approached me. He looked about 50, with a neatly trimmed grey beard and eyes that were too calm. "You're the recorder," he said, not asking. "Yeah," I replied. "Just here to film." He nodded. "Do not stop recording once we begin, even if it becomes difficult." That should have been my cue to walk away. Instead, I adjusted my camera settings. At midnight, the church doors opened. Inside there were no pews, no altar, just darkness and the smell of old stone and melted wax. The crowd formed a line, exiting the church and moving into the street, candles raised chest high. Someone began to hum a slow, low tune that sounded like a hymn but with unfamiliar notes, stretched and warped. The parade moved forward. We walked through streets that felt wrong, not dangerous, too quiet, too empty. The usual distant sirens and traffic noise were gone, replaced by the soft crunch of footsteps and the faint hum growing louder as we passed intersections. I noticed something unsettling. The street signs were missing. Not torn down or vandalized, gone entirely. Blank poles stood where signs should have been. I zoomed in on one building as we passed. Its windows were dark, but behind the glass, I saw movement. Faces pressed close, watching. Their mouths were open, but no sound came out. "Who lives here?" I whispered to the man beside me. He didn't turn his head. Those who could not walk anymore. A block later, the bells rang again. This time, they didn't come from the church. They came from everywhere, from above us, from beneath the pavement, from inside the buildings. Each toll sent a vibration through the ground, and I felt it in my teeth. The humming stopped. The people lifted their crosses higher. I noticed then that the parade wasn't heading toward any known church. We were moving deeper into abandoned territory streets I was sure had been demolished years ago. Yet here they were, intact, narrow, closing in. My camera began to glitch. The screen flickered, briefly showing frames I hadn't filmed, close-ups of faces staring directly into the lens. Mouths stretched too wide. Eyes filled with candlelight. I stopped walking. The parade did not. I stood frozen as they moved ahead, their backs to me. Dozens of identical dark coats and raised crosses disappearing into fog that hadn't been there moments before. Then someone touched my shoulder. I turned, heart slamming, expecting another marcher. It was a child, a little boy, maybe 8 years old, holding a candle too big for his small hands. His eyes were dark, almost black, and his voice was barely more than breath. "You're not supposed to see the end," he said. "What end?" I asked. He pointed down the street. The fog parted just enough for me to see it. A massive bell tower stood at the far end of the road, impossibly tall, built from stone that looked older than the city itself. There was no church attached, just the tower, rising into darkness. Bells swinging violently inside. Though no ropes were visible, the parade stopped before it. Everyone turned at once. Every face looked at me. The bells rang again, louder than ever, and the child smiled. The smile on the child's face didn't reach his eyes. They were empty. Not dark empty, like holes punched into something that should have been human. The bells began to swing harder, slamming against their frames with a force that shook the buildings around us. Dust fell from cracked brick walls. Windows rattled. My camera let out a sharp electronic squeal, then went silent. The screen went black. "No," I whispered, tapping the side of it. "No. No." Every candle in the parade extinguished at once. Total darkness swallowed the street. I felt it then, hands on my arms, my shoulders, my back. Cold hands. Too many of them. Fingers tightening, guiding me forward. I tried to pull away, but the grip was relentless, coordinated, as if they had practiced this. The bells stopped. Silence crashed down so suddenly, my ears rang. A single candle flared back to life in front of me. The man with the grey beard stood there, holding it. His calm expression hadn't changed, but now I could see the truth in his face. His skin was cracked, like old paint peeling away. Beneath it, something darker shifted, alive and impatient. "You should not have paused," he said gently. "Witnesses must remain in motion." "Witness to what?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He turned the candle toward the bell tower. Arrival. The fog thickened, rolling across the street like something breathing. Shapes moved inside it, tall, bent silhouettes dragging themselves forward. I heard the sound of chains scraping stone, of feet that didn't quite lift off the ground. The parade parted, forming a corridor, and something came through at first. It looked like a statue being carried upright, tall, rigid, draped in a long, dark robe. But then it moved on its own, stepping forward with slow, deliberate precision. Its head was bowed. A crown of thorns sat not on flesh, but on something that looked like burned wood fused with bone. Where its face should have been, there was only shadow except for 2 faint points of light, glowing like dying embers. The child dropped his candle and knelt. Everyone followed, except me. My legs refused to bend. The thing lifted its head. The embers flared brighter, and suddenly, memories flooded my mind that were not mine. I saw the city centuries ago, before skyscrapers, before neon lights. I saw settlers building a bell tower on stolen ground. I saw them promise protection, salvation, eternity. I saw the first parade, hundreds marching willingly, believing they were honoring Christ. They rang the bells, and something answered. Not a savior, a watcher, a thing that fed on devotion, fear, and ritual repetition. It did not kill, it claimed. It hollowed people out and left them walking, kneeling, marching forever. The abandoned streets weren't abandoned, they were occupied. The thing took another step toward me. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing into my lungs. You record, it said not aloud, but inside my skull. Its voice sounded like bells heard underwater. You remember. Memory sustains us. I don't want this, I whispered. I won't show it. I won't tell anyone. It tilted its head, considering you already will. The bells rang once. My camera turned on by itself. The screen lit up, showing me standing there kneeling. I looked down. My legs had bent. Panic tore through me as my body moved against my will, lowering itself to the ground. My hands trembled as they raised the camera, framing the entity perfectly, professionally. Please, I begged. Let me go. The grey-bearded man stepped closer. Someone must leave, he said. The story must travel. That is the agreement. The child looked up at me, tears running down his face now. Real tears. I was the recorder last year, he whispered. The entity raised one long, twisted hand and placed it on my forehead. Cold exploded through my skull. I woke up on the steps of a modern church at dawn. Cars passed. People laughed. The city roared back to life like nothing had happened. My camera lay beside me, fully charged. Inside the memory card was a single file, a perfectly shot video of the parade, every face. Clear dot, every bell audible at the end of the footage. The camera slowly zoomed in on the entities. Shadow as it loomed over the lens, and then just before the cut to black, turned and looked straight at me. I tried to delete the file, it reappeared. I destroyed the card. The footage showed up on my laptop. I smashed the laptop. The video uploaded itself every Christmas Eve since, at exactly 11:30 p.m. The bells ring again somewhere in New York. Reports come in of a silent parade moving through streets that shouldn't exist. And every year, the comments appear beneath the leaked footage. I recognize that street. That's my grandfather. Why does the bell tower look closer this time? I don't film anymore, but I still hear the bells. And I know one night soon, they'll ring for me again. Story 3 *, The Men Who Walk Backward. No one in New York noticed the first one. That's the thing about this city. People mind their own business, especially in winter. You can walk strangely, dress strangely, mutter to yourself, and no one will look twice. So when a man walked backward through the streets of Ridgeway, a small, nearly forgotten neighborhood tucked between Queens and the edge of Long Island, no one stopped him at first. He wore a long black coat despite the mild December weather. His head was tilted slightly downward, chin tucked to his chest, as if he were studying the pavement behind him. Each step was slow, deliberate, perfectly balanced. He never stumbled. A woman passing by turned around after a few steps, frowning. She swore she heard him whisper something, not words, counting by the next evening. There were two of them, walking backward along the same street, same pace, same posture, same black coats. By Christmas week, there were 7. Ridgeway was the kind of neighborhood that barely appeared on maps. Old row houses, closed storefronts, a single church that only opened on holidays. The Jesus Parade passed through it every year on its way to a larger celebration uptown, but Ridgeway itself never hosted anything. It was just there. People began whispering. The backward walkers never spoke to anyone. They didn't acknowledge cars, traffic lights, or obstacles. Somehow, they avoided everything without ever turning around. Security footage from a corner. Delhi showed something worse. Their faces, or rather, the lack of expression, eyes open, ing. Mouths slightly parted, as if mid-breath. They walked backward for hours without stopping. At exactly 11:59 p.m., they disappeared, turning into an alley behind an abandoned rectory and never coming out. The police were called after a teenage boy followed one of them and never returned. That's when the rumors turned into fear. I lived on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the alley. I didn't believe the stories at first. New York was full of weirdness, viral stunts, performance art, attention seekers, until I saw one of them up close. It was Christmas Eve. I was walking home from work, hands buried in my pockets, breath fogging the cold air. The street was quiet, too quiet for the city. No traffic, no music, no distant sirens. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow, measured. I moved aside instinctively, expecting someone to pass. No one did. The footsteps continued, but they weren't behind me anymore. They were in front of me. I froze. A man stood less than 5 feet away, facing away from me, walking backward. His shoes moved toward me as his body leaned away, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear as he passed me. I smelled it, old candle wax, dust, something rotten underneath. I glanced at his face, and my stomach dropped. His eyes were open, but they weren't focused on the street behind him. They were focused on me, tracking me as he moved away. His lips moved silently. I realized he wasn't counting numbers. He was counting names. My name when I got home. I locked the door and turned every light on that night. Ridgeway held its first emergency town meeting in decades. Barely 20 people showed up. No one from the city. No news crews. Just locals, exhausted and frightened. An old woman named Mrs. Calder, who had lived there since the 1950s, spoke without standing up. "They're rehearsing," she said. "Rehearsing what?" Someone asked. She swallowed hard. Returning, she explained that Ridgeway used to have its own Christmas tradition. Long before the Jesus parade ever passed through, a procession meant to reverse something, a mistake. No one wanted to hear the rest, but the walkers kept increasing by Christmas morning. There were 13. They all appeared at once. Every single one emerged from different streets but converged toward the same alley behind the old rectory. And this time, they weren't empty-handed. Each carried something wrapped in white cloth, something shaped like a human head. The city finally noticed when traffic cameras glitched, freezing whenever the walkers passed through. Emergency calls flooded in, all reporting the same thing. People were seeing themselves walking backward, outside their homes, still alive, still breathing, but moving toward the alley. I didn't sleep that night. At 11:59 p.m., the footsteps began outside my window. Not one pair, dozens, all moving backward, all stopping at the same time, directly in front of my building. Then someone knocked on my door from the hallway camera. I saw him wearing my coat, walking backward, smiling. I didn't open the door. I stood frozen in my apartment, staring at the hallway monitor as the thing wearing my coat continued to smile. Its body was angled away from the camera, shoulders turned toward the stairwell. But its head was twisted, just enough to look directly at me. Backward, its lips moved again, still counting. The knock came a second time, soft, polite, patient. Then the hallway lights went out. The monitor cut to black dot at exactly 12 a.m. Every church bell in Ridgeway rang once and then stopped outside. The footsteps resumed, not just forward or backward now, but together, synchronized, moving toward the alley behind the old rectory. I don't know why I followed. Fear should have locked me in place. But something deeper pulled at me, something ancient and unavoidable, like gravity. I grabbed my coat, left the lights on, and stepped into the street. Every door on Maple Street was open. Every apartment, every house, people stood in their doorways, motionless, eyes open, breathing shallow. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. Then they stepped backward. All at once, bodies moved away from their homes without turning around, feet finding the pavement perfectly, as if the street itself remembered them. I felt it then. The street wasn't leading us. It was pulling us back. The alley was wider than it should have been, wider than I remembered. The brick walls stretched impossibly high, swallowing the weak glow of streetlights. At the far end stood the rectory, abandoned, condemned. Its windows boarded shut, except they weren't boarded anymore. Candles burned behind the glass. Inside, figures moved. The backward walkers formed a line, silent and reverent. One by one, they entered the building, never turning, never stumbling when my turn came. My body resisted. My feet locked. Something in me screamed to run. That's when I heard Mrs. Calder's voice behind me. "You still remember forward," she said. She stood upright, facing me properly, eyes sharp and alive. Then listen carefully. She told me the truth as the bells began ringing against low, distorted, wrong. Decades ago, Ridgeway tried to separate itself from the city. Not politically, spiritually. The Jesus parade used to stop here once a year, bless the streets, mark the homes, move on. But one winter, the parade never came. Snow buried the roads. People waited, prayed, panicked, so they made their own procession. They believed if they walked backward back through sin, back through time, back through mistake. They could undo suffering, undo death, undo loss. They were wrong. What answered them wasn't salvation. It was correction, something that believed time should move the other way. Something that learnt faces by watching them walk away every year since. It took a little more memories, more people, more direction, until now. This year, Mrs. Calder whispered, "It wants the whole neighborhood." The doors of the rectory slammed open. Inside wasn't a church. It was a mirror of Ridgeway streets, folding into streets, alleys looping into themselves, buildings stacked backward on top of memory. And at the center stood the thing guiding them, not a demon, not a god, a reflection of everyone who had ever walked away from something they couldn't fix. It raised its hand, and everyone began walking backward, again into the structure, into the reflection, into the correction. Mrs. Calder grabbed my arm. "Someone has to stop moving," she said. "Someone has to break the direction." She shoved me forward. The pain was instant, like pushing against a current that hated me. Every step forward felt wrong, unnatural, forbidden. The entity screamed, not in anger, but confusion. I ran straight into the heart of the structure. Everything collapsed inward. The bells rang non-stop. Then silence. Morning came. Ridgeway still existed, but it was smaller, blocks missing, buildings erased, apartments reduced to empty lots that looked like they had never been built. No missing persons were reported, no investigations launched, because officially, no one ever lived there, except me. The alley is gone now. The rectory never existed. But sometimes, late at night, when I walk home, I hear footsteps behind me, slow, careful, moving backward, and I don't turn around, because I know if I ever walk back toward it, it will finally remember my name. Story 4 *, the parade that never reached the cross. New York people think New York never sleeps, but on Christmas Eve, there is a strange pause just before midnight, like the city holds its breath. That's when the Jesus parade begins. It isn't advertised. There are no flyers, no permits, no official route. Yet every year, in certain neighborhoods, people swear they see it. A silent procession of robed figures carrying wooden crosses, candles burning even in heavy snow. Their heads bowed as they walk through streets that should be crowded but suddenly aren't. I didn't believe in it either. I was a freelance videographer in Brooklyn, picking up whatever gigs I could. That year, a small local church hired me to film what they called a midnight Christmas devotion walk. They said it honored Christ's journey, nothing theatrical, nothing political, just prayer and remembrance, easy money. The church was old, sandwiched between a laundromat and a shuttered bodega. Its sign flickered like it hadn't decided whether it still wanted to exist. Inside, about 40 people had gathered. Families, elderly couples, a few young men with cameras like mine. What struck me first was the silence. No chatter, no laughter, not even nervous whispers. Everyone just waited. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the pastor stepped forward. He was tall, painfully thin, with deep-set eyes that looked exhausted rather than holy. "We walk tonight," he said softly, as they once walked. No explanation, no prayer. The doors opened on their own. Outside, the street was wrong. It wasn't empty. New York is never empty, but it was quiet in a way I had never experienced. No traffic, no sirens, no distant music. Snow fell straight down, untouched by wind. Then I noticed the route. The pastor turned left, away from the main road, into a side street I knew didn't go anywhere. It was a dead end. No one questioned it. The procession moved slowly. Candles cast long, crawling shadows that bent in directions shadows shouldn't bend. I filmed everything, my camera battery draining faster than usual. The screen occasionally glitching like it couldn't decide what it was seeing. As we walked, more people joined, not from side streets, from doorways. Apartment doors opened silently, and residents stepped out, already dressed in white robes, faces pale, eyes glassy. They merged into the parade without speaking, without acknowledging anyone. I whispered to the woman beside me, "Is this part of it?" She didn't look at me. "They always come out," she said. "They remember." That word stuck with me. Remember what? A block later, I realized something terrifying. We were no longer in Brooklyn. The buildings looked similar, but the details were wrong. Store signs were written in fonts I'd never seen. Street names were carved into stone instead of metal. Christmas decorations hung from lampposts that didn't match city designs. I checked my phone, no signal, no time. Just a frozen lock screen. Ahead, I saw it. A man carrying a massive wooden cross, walking barefoot through the snow. Blood streaked his heels, but he didn't slow. His robe was darker than the others, stained, heavy. The crowd subtly shifted to give him space. No one walked. Beside him, I zoomed in with my camera. The footage distorted violently, for just one frame. One horrible frame. I saw his face. It wasn't Jesus, it was dozens of faces layered together. Eyes open, mouths slightly parted, all whispering the same word. "Follow." My chest tightened. I lowered the camera, suddenly aware of my own footsteps echoing too loudly. That's when the singing began. Not hymns, breathing, deep. Rhythmic breathing, rising and falling in unison. As if the parade itself were alive. Each exhale fogged the air, forming shapes that lingered to long arms, torsos, figures that walked alongside us and then dissolved. I tried to stop walking. My legs didn't listen. We turned onto another street, one I knew for a fact did not exist. At the end of it stood a massive cross-shaped scaffold, erected in the middle of an empty square. Candles already burned at its base, wax pooling thick and red like flesh. The man with the cross stopped. Everyone else did too. The pastor turned around and finally looked at us. At me. "Cameras don't belong past this point," he said. I felt hands on my arms, gentle, firm, guiding me forward. "Wait," I said. This wasn't in the agreement. The pastor smiled. Sadness carved deep into his face. "It never is the first time." The man with the cross began to lift it, and every person in the parade, every single one, raised their heads at once and looked directly at me. Their eyes were wrong too deep, too aware. "You see now," they whispered together. The candles flared. The square stretched wider, deeper, like space itself was folding inward, and somewhere far above us, church bells began to ring slow, deliberate, counting down something I suddenly knew I didn't want to reach. That was when I realized the parade wasn't a reenactment, it was a return, and it hadn't reached the cross yet. Part 2 will reveal what the parade truly sacrifices, and why some people are never seen again after Christmas Eve. I don't remember deciding to run. I only remember the feeling, like the city had turned its face away from me. The bells overhead slowed, each chime heavier than the last, vibrating through my ribs instead of my ears. The square felt larger now, stretching outward in impossible angles. Buildings leaned inward, their windows dark, watching. Snow no longer fell from the sky. It drifted upward, pulled toward the cross like ash returning to a fire. The man with the cross lifted it higher. The crowd inhaled together, and suddenly I could move. I tore my arm free and stumbled backward, nearly falling over a kneeling figure. No one tried to stop me. No hands grabbed. No voices shouted. The silence was worse than pursuit. I ran anyway. The street behind me warped as I moved each step, carrying me farther than it should have. The sound of my breathing felt wrong, delayed, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't look back until I reached what should have been an intersection. It wasn't there. The street ended in a brick wall that hadn't existed before, plastered with faded posters of past parades. Dates stretched back decades. Each poster showed the same image, robed figures, candles, a cross, and at the bottom of every one, a list of names. Some were scratched out, some were circled, one was still wet with ink. My name behind me. The breathing stopped. I turned slowly. The crowd stood at the far end of the street, motionless. The man with the cross was gone. In his place stood the pastor, hands folded, eyes closed like he was listening to something beneath the ground. "You can't leave in the middle," he said gently. "That's how people get lost." "What is this?" I demanded. "What are you doing to people?" He opened his eyes. "They volunteered," he said. At first, the brick wall behind me softened, the mortar sagging like melting wax. Images bled through it, memories that weren't mine. Crowded tenements, starving winters, fires, plagues, streets filled with the sick and forgotten. New York has always been hungry, the pastor continued, and hunger attracts things that promise relief. The wall split open. I saw the square again, but older. Dirt instead of pavement. Lanterns instead of streetlights. And a different crowd, thinner, terrified, kneeling around a wooden cross planted deep into the ground. There was a winter, he said, when prayer wasn't enough. The thing behind the promise revealed itself then not as a god, not as a demon, but as something wearing belief the way a body wears skin. It did not ask for worship, it asked for witnesses. Every year, the pastor said, we walk so it can remember what it is. And so the city doesn't forget what it costs to keep going. I felt the breathing return, this time inside my head. The wall dissolved completely, and the square snapped back into place around us. The crowd was closer now. Their faces were clearer. I recognized some of them, people from my neighborhood. A subway conductor, a woman who ran a corner bakery, a man I'd seen sleeping under scaffolding last winter. They don't die, the pastor said, reading my thoughts. Not the way you mean. They finished the walk. The candles flared again. The man with the cross reappeared directly in front of me. I could see him clearly now. His form flickered, faces shifting across his features like reflections on broken glass. One of them was mine. Not yet. Pick it up, he whispered. The cross lowered itself between us, felt its weight before I touched. Its centuries of footsteps pressed into splintered wood. The moment my fingers brushed it, my camera screamed to life in my pocket, vibrating violently. The screen lit up. Live footage, Not of the square, of me. Standing in the church, earlier that night agreeing to the job. Then another clip, me. Weeks from now, walking barefoot in the snow. Then another, me. Years older, eyes hollow, guiding new faces through empty streets. No, I said, pulling my hand back. The crowd exhaled in disappointment. The man's many mouths frowned. The pastor stepped forward. If you don't carry it, he said softly, someone else will. Someone who didn't get a choice. That was when I understood the parade never reached the cross because the cross never stays carried. Passers, I screamed and shoved the wooden beam with everything I had not away. But down it cracked against the frozen ground. The sound split the night. The bells shattered into noise. Candles blew out. The crowd recoiled as if burned. The square folded inward, collapsing like a stage set struck too hard. I ran. This time, the city came back. Sirens screamed. Cars honked. Snow blew sideways in the wind. I burst onto a lit avenue and collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing, my hands bleeding from splinters. People gathered. Someone called an ambulance. When I looked back, the side street was gone, just brick. The footage on my camera survived, but every time I play it, something is missing. There's no cross, no man, only a long procession of people walking through. New York at midnight, heads bowed. Candles burning and one empty space at the front. Waiting. Every Christmas Eve since then. I stay awake, and every year, just before midnight, my phone buzzes with a notification from a number that doesn't exist. One word, ready? Because the parade never reaches the cross. It only looks for who will carry it next. Story 5.
The statue that bled incense on Christmas Eve.
New York never truly sleeps, but that night, parts of Manhattan felt unnaturally awake. The Jesus parade that year was larger than ever. Thousands gathered near Lower Manhattan, where a newly restored religious statue of Jesus Christ was to be unveiled at the center of the celebration. The statue was massive, nearly 12 feet tall, crafted from white marble, its arms open wide, its face carved with an expression of infinite mercy. It had arrived quietly 3 weeks earlier from an old, closed monastery in upstate New York. No one asked why. The organizers said it was a donation. The church said the paperwork was misplaced, and the city approved it without inspection. That alone should have raised concern. Ethan Morales, a freelance videographer, was hired to document the parade for a Christian media channel. He didn't care much about religion, he cared about footage. Good lighting, unique moments, viral potential. The statue was perfect for that. As dusk fell, candles were lit, hymns echoed through the streets. The parade began moving slowly, reverently, toward the plaza where the statue stood beneath floodlights. That was when Ethan noticed the smell. It wasn't the usual city mix of exhaust and food carts. It was incense, strong, heavy, sweet, to the point of nausea, but no one was burning incense. He zoomed his camera toward the statue. The marble surface looked damp at first. Ethan assumed it was condensation from the cold. But when the camera adjusted focus, he saw thin, dark streaks trailing down from the statue's eyes. Not tears, thicker, golden brown, moving slowly. Is that oil? Someone whispered nearby. A woman reached out and touched one of the streaks with her fingertip. She brought it to her nose. her face drained of color. "That's incense," she said. "Old church incense." The crowd murmured, uneasy but still controlled. Religious artifacts leaking oil or scent weren't unheard of. Some even called it miraculous. Then the statue's chest cracked, just a sound at first tick-like. Eye-splitting. The singing faltered. A thin fracture spread across the statue's torso, glowing faintly from within, as if something warm lived under the stone. Ethan didn't stop recording that the incense smell intensified, until people began coughing. Several children cried, clutching their heads. The candles flickered violently, though there was no wind. Then a man screamed. His scream wasn't fear, it was recognition. "I hear it," he shouted. "It's the prayer I said when I died." People turned toward him. "Died." Someone repeated, before anyone could respond. The statue's mouth opened. Stone should not bend. Stone should not open. But the lips parted with a grinding sound, and from inside came a low chant, not spoken aloud, but felt vibrating through bone and memory. Every person present experienced something different. A woman felt the weight of a confession she had buried decades ago. A priest felt his faith buckle. Ethan saw, for half a second, his own face reflected inside the statue's hollow chest holder, terrified. Begging, the chant grew louder. The fracture widened. Something inside the statue breathed. Security rushed forward, shouting for the crowd to move back. But their voices sounded distant, warped, as if swallowed by the sound pouring from the marble. Then the statue's eyes turned black, not shadowed, not darkened, empty. The incense began pouring faster now, flowing like blood from the cracks, pooling at the statue's feet. Wherever it touched the ground, the stone pavement darkened, as if burned. A child near the front whispered, "Why is Jesus crying fire?" Ethan lowered his camera for the first time. The chant changed. It wasn't prayer anymore. It was a call, and somewhere, beneath New York, below subway tunnels, below forgotten crypts, something answered. The statue leaned forward, the crowd panicked, and the parade that was meant to celebrate salvation became something else entirely. Something that had been waiting a very long time to be seen again. The chant stopped all at once. The sudden silence was worse. For 3 full seconds, there was no sound, no screams, no sirens, not even the hum of the city. New York itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the statue spoke. Not aloud, inside every mind, "You called me." People collapsed where they stood. Some clutched their heads. Others dropped to their knees, sobbing, whispering prayers they hadn't spoken in years. Ethan staggered backward, his camera dangling uselessly at his side. The statue leaned farther forward, marble joints cracking like knuckles that had waited centuries to move. The glowing fracture in its chest split completely open. Inside was no machinery, no hollow stone. There was a sanctuary. A small chapel existed within the statue's torso, and blackened by soot, lined with melted candles and bone-white pews. At its center stood an altar carved with symbols that did not belong to any known Christian sect. And nailed above the altar was a name, written again and again, "The Listener." A priest near the front screamed in horror. "That isn't Christ," he cried. This is wrong, this is forbidden." The statue's head turned toward him with unnatural smoothness. Crack. The priest fell silent, blood leaking from his ears, eyes frozen wide as if he had heard something the human brain was never meant to process. The incense flooding the street began to rise, defying gravity, wrapping around people like hands made of smoke. Wherever it touched skin, memories, surface confessions, betrayals, last words spoken at deathbeds. People weren't being attacked. They were being answered, Ethan remembered. Then something he hadn't thought about since childhood, when his mother died. Alone in a hospital room, he had whispered a desperate prayer into her ear. Please, let someone hear her. Let someone be there. The statue's gaze locked onto him. I was. The ground shook. Beneath the plaza, something massive shifted. The old monastery the statue came from hadn't been abandoned, it had been sealed, built atop something ancient that fed on prayers not meant for God. The Jesus parade wasn't a celebration. It was a summoning. Emergency lights flooded the streets as police and military units arrived. But their radios only broadcast Whisper's voices repeating the same sentence over and over. It listens when he does not. The statue straightened fully now, towering above the crowd. Its arms, once open in mercy, twisted inward, fingers curling like claws. Carved from faith itself, the altar inside its chest ignited names, began carving themselves into the stone. Pavement, thousands of them each belonging to someone who had prayed in desperation, felt abandoned, unheard. The listener had been collecting them, and now it had a body. Ethan raised his camera again, hands shaking. Not for work, for proof, for the world. But as he pressed record, the statue's mouth widened impossibly, splitting its face in half. Witnesses are also prayers. The camera feed distorted. Ethan felt warmth spill from his nose. His vision filled with light, blinding, sacred, wrong. He understood then that recording it was the same as believing, and belief was consent. The final thing he saw was the statue stepping off its pedestal, marble feet cracking the street as it began to walk deeper into the city toward hospitals, churches, cemeteries, toward places where people begged to be heard by mourning. The plaza was empty. No statue, no bodies, no damage reports. The footage from every device that night was corrupted, except one frame. A still image recovered days later showed the statue mid-step, its chest open, and inside the chapel, new candles burning, each flame shaped like a screaming mouth. The Jesus parade was never held again. Officially, the incident never happened, but every Christmas Eve in New York, when the air smells faintly of incense with no source, people say that if you whisper a prayer too desperately, something answers back.
Story 6. The Bells That Walked. Every December, the neighborhood of St. Jude's Row in Lower Manhattan transformed into something reverent and strange. Streets were closed, windows draped with white cloth, and church bells rang longer than usual, echoing through alleyways where sunlight rarely touched. The Jesus parade had passed through these streets for over 100 years. Statues carried shoulder-high, choirs chanting, children dressed as angels, and bells ringing in synchronized rhythm. Locals said the bells were blessed. Outsiders said the sound lingered too long in the air. I had lived in New York my entire life and somehow never attended the parade until the year my sister Ruth moved into St. Jude's Row. She insisted it was beautiful, sacred even. She said the bells helped her sleep. That alone unsettled me. Bells never helped anyone sleep. On the morning of the parade, Ruth called me sounding excited, almost breathless. She said something had changed. That the bells had been ringing since dawn, even though the parade wouldn't begin until evening. I assumed she was exaggerating. She always did when she felt lonely. But when I arrived that afternoon, the sound was unmistakable, low, steady bell tolls vibrating through the pavement, through my chest, through my teeth. The streets were already crowded. Vendors sold candles stamped with Jesus' face. Choirs practiced hymns that sounded oddly slow, dragged out as if the singers were struggling to breathe between notes. Overhead, the sky was a dull, oppressive gray, heavy with the promise of snow that never came. Ruth met me outside her apartment. Her eyes looked sunken, ringed dark, like she hadn't slept in days. She smiled too quickly and grabbed my arm with a strength that surprised me. "You hear them, right?" she asked. "The bells?" I said. "Yeah. They're loud this year." She shook her head slowly. "No. They're closer." Before I could ask what she meant, the parade began. The first statue appeared from the far end of the street, a towering depiction of Jesus carrying the cross, illuminated by hundreds of candles. Behind it walked men in long robes, each carrying a massive bronze bell suspended from wooden frames. They rang them in perfect unison, their movements mechanical, expressionless. As the bells rang, the crowd fell silent. Not reverent silence, something heavier. People stopped whispering. Children stopped crying. Even the wind seemed to die. The sound crawled into my head, vibrating behind my eyes. With every toll, I felt a pressure build, like something was pressing from the inside of my skull, trying to listen through me. Ruth squeezed my arm harder. "They didn't used to ring like this," she whispered. "They didn't used to move on their own." I watched the bell carriers more closely. Their feet struck the ground in perfect time, but something was wrong. The bells were swaying too precisely, not reacting to motion but directing it. It looked less like the men were carrying the bells and more like the bells were pulling them forward. A scream erupted somewhere behind us. Brief. Cut off abruptly. No one turned. The parade continued. As the procession passed, I noticed doors along the street slowly opening on their own, apartments, shops, even abandoned buildings. People stepped out barefoot, faces blank, eyes unfocused, drawn toward the sound. Some joined the parade, falling into step behind the bells without question. I tried to pull Ruth back toward her building. "We should leave," I said. "This isn't right." She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the bells. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "They're calling," she said softly. "They know our names." The bells rang again, louder. Closer. I felt something shift beneath my feet. The ground vibrated, not from sound, but from movement, like something massive was walking below the street, matching the bell's rhythm step for step. That was when I realized the bells weren't echoing. They were approaching. Not from the parade. From everywhere. Church towers miles away began ringing in the same rhythm. Old, decommissioned bells. School bells. Firehouse bells that hadn't worked in decades. The city became a single instrument, ringing itself awake. People started collapsing. Some clutched their heads, screaming that something was inside them. Others dropped peacefully, eyes rolling back, lips moving in silent prayer. I dragged Ruth toward the apartment building, fighting against the invisible pull. The bells grew deafening, no longer sound but presence, something standing right behind me, breathing through the ringing. Inside the building, the noise didn't stop. It was louder. The walls vibrated. Light fixtures swayed. From above us came footsteps, slow and heavy, descending the stairs in time with the bells. Ruth turned to me then, fear finally breaking through her trance. "It's not Jesus," she said. "It's what listens when we pray." The bells rang once more. And the footsteps stopped outside her door. The knocking didn't come from a hand. It came from inside the bell. A hollow, metallic thud pressed through the door, vibrating the hinges like the building itself was being struck. With every impact, the sound of bells outside paused, as if listening, then resumed louder, angrier, impatient. Ruth backed away, covering her ears. Blood trickled from her right nostril. "It followed us," she whispered. "It always does. If you hear it long enough, it learns your shape." The door bowed inward. I grabbed a kitchen chair and jammed it under the handle, knowing how useless it was. The walls shook. From the hallway came the sound of dragging metal, like a bell being pulled across tile, scraping closer inch by inch. Then the knocking stopped. The bells outside stopped too. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt intentional, like something holding its breath. From the other side of the door, a voice spoke. It was Ruth's voice. "Open up," it said gently. "I'm cold." Ruth screamed. The voice corrected itself mid-sentence, layering over into another, "Mine." "You don't want to be alone," it said. "None of you do." I realized then what St. Jude's Row really was. Not a holy place. Not cursed ground. A listening post. For over a century, people had prayed here. Begged. Confessed. Whispered their fears into silence, believing someone was on the other side. And something had been. The bells weren't symbols. They were mouths. Every prayer ever spoken here had fed it. Every procession strengthened it. Every December, when faith peaked and desperation thickened the air, the parade didn't honor Jesus. It woke the thing that answered. The door burst inward. But there was nothing there. No figure. No body. Just a massive bronze bell standing upright in the hallway, impossibly large, its surface etched with thousands of tiny names, names of the living, the dead, and the forgotten. Its interior glowed faintly red, like a heartbeat. The bell rang. Up close, it wasn't sound. It was command. I dropped to my knees, memories ripping open inside my head, every regret, every secret prayer I'd never said out loud. I felt them being heard. Judged. Sorted. Ruth stood frozen, staring into the bell's hollow center. "I asked it to take my loneliness," she said calmly. It said yes. The bell rang again. The walls peeled away. Suddenly we weren't in the apartment anymore. We stood in the street, but not the real one. This version was wider, darker, stretched impossibly long. Thousands of people lined the road, standing motionless, mouths open as bells moved among them on their own, walking, dragging themselves forward on unseen limbs. Each time a bell stopped before someone, it rang once. And that person folded inward, collapsing into sound, absorbed. "Once you're taken," Ruth said, eyes glowing faintly red, "you get peace. No doubt. No fear. You just ring." She stepped toward the bell. I grabbed her hand. For a moment, she hesitated. Her face cracked, confusion flashing through the calm. "That's the lie," I said desperately. "That's what it gives instead of comfort. You don't rest. You disappear." The bell screamed. Not rang. Screamed. Every bell in the city answered. Church towers split open. Bronze crashed onto streets. Subway tunnels filled with sound so loud it shattered concrete. People miles away dropped where they stood, clutching their ears as prayers they never remembered saying poured out of them. I pulled Ruth back with everything I had. And for the first time, the bell recoiled. It hated resistance. It fed on surrender. The names on its surface began to crack and flake away. The glow inside dimmed. The bells across the city rang out of sync, panicked, broken. The thing listening had never been challenged. The street collapsed back into the apartment. The bell shrank, warping, folding in on itself until it was nothing more than a cracked handbell lying on the floor. Silence fell. Real silence. Outside, sirens wailed. People screamed. Windows shattered as surviving bells fell dead from towers, inert and harmless. Ruth collapsed into my arms, sobbing. The Jesus Parade never happened again. Officially, it was cancelled due to structural concerns. Unofficially, no one on St. Jude's Row could stand the sound of bells anymore. They say if you walk there late at night in December, you can still hear a faint ringing beneath the street, not calling, not answering. Just waiting. Because prayers never stop. And something is always listening.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terramouth.